Hi, I'm Dan and welcome to Polar Currency and video number 12. This video explores the series 1915 and 1918 Federal Reserve banknotes, or FRBNs, because I'm not going to say Federal Reserve banknote 1,000 times in this video. The two series 1915 and 1918 FRBNs look the same, yet each have their own narrative and history, from a way to replace national banknotes to unscrupulous silver miner owners, questionable politicians, a US Treasury fire sale, World War I, and the mining of both 1921 silver dollars. FRBNs have quite the story to tell, and they come into three things. One, a possible way to replace national banknotes. Two, a currency supply store gap. And three, a failure. Both years were issued with different legislations and different reasons. From a novice collector's viewpoint, FRBNs are confused with national banknotes because they state national currency across the top, but they aren't national banknotes. FRBNs were originally meant to replace national banknotes, but so were the 1914 Federal Reserve notes for that matter. The Federal Reserve Act of 1913 gave national banks the option to sell their circulation privilege to the Federal Reserve System beginning in 1915. Meaning that Federal Reserve banks would purchase the bonds the banks used to secure their national banknote circulations. In turn, the Federal Reserve banks would use those bonds to secure their own circulations. That's why the designation national currency was carried over across the top of all FRBNs. All right, before I get too far, I have to take a pause. I'm not some economic expert, and frankly, the financial aspect of banknotes kind of sometimes, bore me to tears. I'm fully aware that the circumstances of what does or does not provide securities that back various banknotes types is part of the currency story and history, and sometimes that's interesting, but in this case, it's not. Trust me, the details get deep, and I'm not really going to go there. Honestly, I prefer legal tender notes and modern Federal Reserve notes because they're simple to understand because, being a fiat currency, they aren't backed by anything. The government says it's legal tender, so it's legal tender. That's easy to understand, and I'm good with that. And for those of you who want to carry around 100 pounds of silver for pocket change, well, all I have to say is,
man's entitled to his opinion.
Like usual, I digress. I'll do my best to provide a financial 101 overview as to why there were two separate issues of large-size FRBNs. The Series 1915 FRBNs were basically issued and redeemed under the similar terms and conditions as national banknotes, except they weren't limited to the amount of capital stock of the Federal Reserve Bank issuing them, whatever that means. Some local national banks took advantage of the offer, but the sales never materialized into the expected flood hoped for by the Treasury officials. Accordingly, the series of 1915 FRBNs sputtered along, being issued in rather small numbers and were only issued by 5 of the 12 Federal Reserve banks. The first large-size 1915 FRBNs began appearing in February 1916, but at a snail's pace. Clearly, local national banks weren't biting, and the National Banking Act was amended to repeal the requirement for a minimum bond deposit with the Federal Reserve Act enacted June 21, 1917. Are you bored yet? The legislative change created the high point of the Series 1915 by October 1917, with just under 13 million out in circulation. Here's a reference point comparing just the $5 note issues from 1915 to 1921. Roughly, there was 1.9 million $5 1915 FRBNs and 24 million 1918 FRBNs, while an estimated 800 million $5 banknotes of Series 1899 silver certificates, Series 1902 national banknotes, 1907 legal tender notes, and 1914 Federal Reserve notes that were issued around the same time. So the FRBNs were definitely a currency failure, and Series 1915 really bombed. If Treasury officials were going to get rid of national banknotes, they'd have to resort to more heavy-handed measures, like in 1935 when the Treasury simply called the last of the bonds that were used to secure the nationals. Trust that the Treasury wanted to get rid of national banknotes because it's much cheaper to print 12 Federal Reserve Bank locations than 6,000 national bank locations. That sums up the Series 1915 FRBNs. The question is, why was the Series 1918 FRBN needed? Well, for financial security-based reasons, but it really wasn't. And that's part of the tangle of stories that include unscrupulous silver mine owners, questionable politicians, a US Treasury fire sale, World War I, and the minting of both 1921 silver dollars. The opening for a second FRBN series, 1918, came with the passage of the Pitman Act of April 23, 1918. To be clear, the Pitman Act of 1918 didn't have anything to do with national banknotes. The Series 1918 FRBNs just became the currency vehicle the U.S. Treasury needed in reaction to the consequences of the Pitman Act, which was arguably a pandering and convoluted piece of legislation that hid behind the stated purpose of conserving gold stocks in the Treasury. The Pitman Act gave the Treasury the ability to unload a huge amount of silver, thereby greatly augmenting the flow of foreign gold into the Treasury. The U.S. Treasury had a huge surplus of silver dollars in storage thanks to the persistent silver mining industry. This corresponded to a plethora of silver certificates in circulation that were backed by silver dollars, which were coming out of the Treasury Department's ears and taking up monetary value and physical space that needed to be balanced with gold. The Treasury was in luck, if you call a devastating world war luck. The United States declared war on Germany on April 6, 1917, allying with Great Britain, who, due to 3 years of devastating war costs themselves, was in great need of, what? You guessed it, silver. Not to be a complete cynic, but one of the underlying objectives of the legislation was to help Great Britain, who really did need silver. Now, I can go on about Great Britain's silver problems, something to do with their colony of India and the rupee being hoarded, blah, blah, blah. But I seriously fell asleep twice writing this paragraph. I'm sticking with the big picture here. In a nutshell, the U.S. sold high and Great Britain purchased the silver, a lot of silver, that, remember, the U.S. Treasury didn't want or need. As a result of the Pitman Act, 295 million silver dollars were melted down, yielding 200 million fine ounces of silver that was shipped to India on Great Britain's dime. Another 11 million were allocated to U.S. coinage. However, here's the pandering part. The Pitman Act required equal numbers of new silver dollars to be made from domestically produced silver. So, ta-da! The silver mining interest hopes and dreams are answered, and the convoluted dots start connecting. The Pitman Act removed roughly 285 million silver dollars from the Treasury vault. That meant that the equivalent value of paper silver certificates had to be removed from circulation, resulting in $285 million needing to be replaced into circulation fast, and everybody looked at the fading Federal Reserve banknote as the answer. The series of 1915 is reborn as Series 1918 with a revised security clause acknowledged the additional backing of certificates of indebtedness and 1-year gold notes. Again, don't know what that means. It's worth noting that in 1918, $1 and $2 FRBN denominations were called for because most of the silver certificates that were going to be redeemed were $1 and $2 notes. The Series 1915 FRBNs were only issued in $5, $10, and $20 denominations. So everything was a go, and the first Series 1918 FRBN started rolling out in August. The Series 1918 FRBN circulation peaked at $236 million by January 1, 1921, vastly outperforming the Series 1915 FRBNs. Now you know why the 1915s are so rare. But why was the Series 1918 such a short run? Well, remember the melting of all that silver? The existing silver certificates were backed by the silver that was packed off and sent to India via Great Britain. New silver dollars had to be minted, and fast. Ironic moment here. For government work that was created by a convoluted act of Congress, a blind squirrel did find a nut. The entire program paid for itself in the form of the new bullion being minted into new silver dollars. Well, hats off to that. All the new paper silver certificates and silver dollar coins being made in the years following World War I made the Series 1918 FRBNs redundant. The public preferred to carry paper silver certificates backed by silver, not FRBNs, which resulted in their discontinuation in October of 1923. Politician sidebar. So, who was Pitman of the Pitman Act of 1918? He was U.S. Senator Key Pitman, a Democrat from the great state of Nevada. What a coincidence that Nevada is a huge silver mining state. Probably why its nickname is the Silver State. Sidebar to the sidebar. Did you know that 89% of the land within Nevada is owned by the federal government? I didn't. Learned that from Geography by Geoff. Check him out on YouTube if you're also a geography nerd like me. You don't think that this fast fact would have anything to do with the cozy relationship of federal politicians and silver miner owners around 1918? Back to Senator Pitman, who served in the U.S. Senate from 1913 to 1940 and was educated as a lawyer but joined the Nevada Gold Rush and worked as a miner until 1901. Pitman was a man who looked out for the best interests of Western miners, and there were plenty of them in Nevada. His brother, Vail Pitman, was governor of Nevada from 1945 to 1951, probably not connected at all. Among his other legislation is the Pittman-Robertson Wildlife Restoration Act of 1937, which set up a formula for federal sharing of ammunition tax revenue for established state wildlife areas. The program is still in effect today. End of sidebar. Okay, so we've checked off the silver mining industry, politicians, the US Treasury, World War I, but what about the newly minted silver dollars? Well, the U.S. Mint had to produce $285 million worth of brand new silver dollar coins, like yesterday, and they hadn't minted a silver dollar since 1904. U.S. Mint chief engraver George T. Morgan had to dust off his old 1878 design and start cracking out new coins. Over 100 million 1921 Morgan dollars were minted before 1 million newly designed peace dollars were struck in late December of 21. There is so much to this story about the original peace dollar design that it's an entire video by itself, which of course I don't care about because, it's coins. Alright, I really don't mean that, but I will go down one coin-related rabbit hole because it's part of the FRBN story. The coin was to symbolize peace following World War I. The reverse of the peace dollar, designed by Anthony D. Francisci, originally had the eagle standing on a broken sword that was a symbol signifying peace. But in test reviews, the public didn't like it a bit, believing a broken sword meant failure, not peace, and Francisci's design was changed without his knowledge by none other than George T. Morgan. The broken sword was changed to the eagle clutching an olive branch, another sign of peace. Again, so much more to this story. What you're seeing here is a 1922 peace dollar next to coin artist and engraver Daniel Carr's engraving of his 2022 peace dollar that has been minted with the original 1921 U.S. Mint broken sword die onto an authentic peace dollar coin. Note that Carr's peace dollar is in high relief, and you can really see how much more beauty this brings to the coin compared to the U.S. Mint 1922 low relief peace dollar. And that checks the last box of the series 1918 FRBNs. It also helps that when it comes to banknotes related to the Federal Reserve, I stop at Minneapolis and when I collect, because I'm a Minnesota homer, which only issued Series 1918 in $1, $2, and $5 denominations. Didn't issue any 1915s. So putting together a type collection of FRBNs for me, it wasn't easy, but it was somewhat affordable and achievable. Starting out my collection is the Series 1918 $1 FRBN with founding father and first president of the United States front and center, left center, George Washington. National currency is engraved across the top, followed by the security clause. Center is the large Federal Reserve Bank title block, giving the Federal Reserve City location with the denomination below. There are two sets of signatures. The top have the standard federal signatures of Registry of the Treasurer and the Treasurer of the United States. The Federal Reserve Bank alphanumeric designation is printed in all four corners. The bottom bears the signatures of the Minneapolis Federal Reserve Bank cashier and governor of the bank, as do all FRBNs. The reverse vignette is that of a flying eagle grasping the U.S. flag that's given the FRBN the nicknames the Flying Eagle or Green Eagle. National currency is repeated on the reverse over Federal Reserve banknote. At the bottom of the reverse is the redemption clause, which is the same for both the Series 1915 and 1918. The only difference between the two series is the financial security clause across the top of the notes. The same 4 signatures are on all my FRBNs, and of course I want to know who they are. I'll start with the Federal Treasury signatures. The Register of the Treasury was Houston B. Teehee, a lawyer and state politician from Oklahoma who was 5/8 Cherokee. He was appointed by President Wilson and served from 1915 to 1919. In 1942, Teehee was inducted into the Oklahoma Hall of Fame. John Burke resigned as governor of North Dakota at the request of Wilson to become the U.S. Treasurer from 1913 to 1921. He served during a period of sweeping national financial times with the passage of the Federal Reserve Act of 1913. After his service as treasurer, Burke became the Chief Justice of the North Dakota Supreme Court. The World War II Liberty ship SS John Burke is named in his honor, as well as Burke County, North Dakota. He also has memorials located at the U.S. Capitol and on North Dakota's Capitol grounds in Bismarck. My $2 FRBN is likely one of my most valuable notes. The front has the portrait of Thomas Jefferson, founding father and 3rd President of the United States. Along with the identical information as the $1 note, the $2 note is different because it's the only FRBN using right angles to frame the left and right borders instead of a curve. Remember, I'm a currency nerd. The $2 note is the only issue where the Federal Reserve title block uses straight text instead of arched above the city name. A curiosity, but that's not what the note is famous for. With all great notes come a great nickname, and this one is one of the best. This is the Battleship Note. The Dreadnought ship was intended to be generic, but it's believed to be the USS New York, one of the very first 2 ships to carry 14-inch guns, and she served in both World Wars. It would seem that the reverse vignette of the battleship was inspired by a combination of these 2 photographs. A very sought-after and highly collectible banknote, the $2 FRBN is listed as number 22 in the 100 Greatest American Notes. Continuing on with signatures. The lower signatures are of the individual Federal Reserve Bank officials, the cashier, and governor. Each Federal Reserve Bank would have different signatures. The first Minneapolis FRBN signature is Theodore Wold, the first governor and chief administrator officer of the Federal Reserve of Minneapolis. He served from 1914 to 1919, bringing over 20 years of banking experience, and was president of the Scandinavian American National Bank in Minneapolis from 1910 until assuming his position with the Fed. When Wold started with the Minneapolis Federal Reserve, it had a total staff of 9 people. When he left, the Federal Reserve had almost 500 people in 3 different Minneapolis locations. The second signature is of the cashier, which for the life of me, I have not been able to define what the official job of a Federal Reserve cashier is. I'm pretty sure it's not this guy signing $1 million of banknotes because, it looks like he's going to take my deposit and then murder me. Anyway, the first cashier of the Minneapolis Federal Reserve Bank was Seymour S. Cook. I couldn't find a picture, but according to the Minneapolis Star newspaper, Cook retired in April of 1923 as deputy governor and then moved to San Diego. Can't blame him, because who wants to dig out of another Minnesota winter when you don't have to? And finally, there is the 1918 $5 FRBN, with the classic portrait of 16th President Abraham Lincoln. The border is identical to that of the 1914 Federal Reserve note, along with the classic large scalloped Treasury seal. One other difference between the 2 series of FRBNs is the legislative authorization dates. The Series 1918 has 2 dates instead of 1. The reverse bears the beautifully engraved vignettes of Columbus's discovery of land on the left and landing of the Pilgrims on the right. Both of these vignettes have appeared on multiple other large-size notes. The reverse of the $5 FRBN is identical to the 1914 Federal Reserve note, with the exception of the currency type distinguishing between the 2. In total, all 12 Federal Reserve banks issued FRBNs with a total of 126 combinations. A $100 note was being developed for the Series 1915, but never got past the proof stage because of lagging orders. A total amount of almost $762 million in face value was issued for both series of FRBNs. The scarcest note is the Series 1918 $50 FRBN from St. Louis, where only 4,000 notes were issued, and it's estimated that only 50 to 70 survived. The explanation as to why so few notes were issued is the same as FRBNs as a whole. They just weren't needed. For the 1915 series, the Treasury greatly overestimated the likelihood that national banks would opt to buy into the new FRBNs. And the Series 1918 just wasn't successful because it didn't have enough public confidence compared to silver certificates, and in less than 3 years, they all became redundant and were discontinued. So ultimately, Federal Reserve banknotes were a failure, but they do tell a great story, and their history intertwines with post-World War I America. They are possibly my favorite U.S. banknotes ever issued. They have a richness with a different and yet still familiar appearance of U.S. currency. Combine that with the beautiful reverse vignettes, and they just stand out. The twin series were separated, defined by their legislations that link them to the past and yet at the same time point to the future. Well, that's it for video number 12. If you like what you see, please hit the thumbs up button and feel free to leave a comment. We'll see you in 2 weeks, and thanks for checking in.